Hello, bonjour, and welcome to the Don't Waste Water podcast. I'm your host, Antoine Walter, and in today's episode, I have the incredible pleasure of welcoming Gaetane Suzenet as my guest. Gaetane is the co-founder of the European Water Tech Accelerator, a managing partner at International Impact Partners, and a steering group member within the European Innovation Partnership on Water for the European Commission. We will be focusing on her startup accelerator hat in our discussion, but you'll notice that her incredible experiences and her regulatory background and involvement are never that far. Gaetane will tell us how environment, economy, and society shall work together to achieve a triple win, usually known as sustainable development, and how finance and venture capital shall be much more involved if we aim at a successful outcome. She'll tell us what strength European startups usually draw on, but also which common weaknesses they share, and how market positioning, business model, go-to-market strategy, and mindset often are the water industry four horsemen of the apocalypse. There's much more to uncover in this week's episode, which is packed with golden nuggets. You'll learn which type of company is the rarest whilst presenting the most potential, the ecosystem differences between North America, Europe, and Asia, how radical differentiation and transposition innovation might be applied to the water sector, or get Gaetane's thoughts on hypergrowth strategies in the water industry or new ways to tackle the innovation value chain. I guess you're probably off the races, but I have to ask you for a little hand in spreading the word right before we start. Please, if you like this podcast, share this episode with at least 2 people. And if there's anything you don't like about the show or a topic you'd like us to cover, just drop me a word, ideally on LinkedIn. Do it, share it. I'll meet you on the other side.
You're listening to Don't Waste Water, the podcast that helps water professionals to improve their wastewater treatment, optimize their operation costs, and keep up with the latest market trends. This podcast is brought to you by GF Piping Systems. As a leading supplier of piping systems made of plastics and metal, GF Piping Systems is the global expert for the safe and reliable transportation of water, chemicals, and gas. For more information, visit gfps.com.
So, hi Gaetane, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Antoine. Thank you very much. That's very nice of you to have me on your program. Well, first of all, on this very special day, I would like to wish everyone, a happy World Water Day. I know probably it's not going to be broadcasted on that day, but
it's important to mention that, we are recording actually on the World Water Day. So let's make something which is at the level of that event, because, it's one day in the year. Hopefully there are more than one day in the year where people put water in the spot. But if there's one, it's today.
It's today indeed, yes. So hopefully, it should be every day, as you say. But let's celebrate it, at least one day today.
Absolutely. It's good to have you on the show because you have a profile which is rare, at least from my end of the water sector, because many previous guests of that podcast have mentioned regulations, finance to be very important drivers to this industry. But you're the very first guest I have, which is directly touching these topics. Does that mean that because you know the regulation, because you're shaping the regulation, that you know the future of this industry?
Well, thank you, Antoine. I wish, I would, but at least, what I'm doing or trying to do is to shape the future, for the best, for the water industry. So it doesn't mean that I know it. I wish, I would. But what I've been trying to do over the last 25 years is very much, shaping the future and thinking forward and not backward, bringing the water sector into the future very modestly. We have very good people in the water industry, of course. But my objective has always been to make sure that we have, the tools and instruments for the future. And since you mentioned finance was actually the area which I think was really missing, in our discussion. We talk about regulation, we talk about technology, we talk about infrastructure, we talk about engineering. But for me, the missing link has been finance. And that's why I have decided to raise this agenda for the water industry.
How did you actually do that? You mentioned the 25 years, which I wouldn't have spontaneously because, I have sometimes to be a gentleman. But now that you've raised it, let me use that one. Can you just swiftly guide us through your steps so that we understand these elements of the finance, which is going to be our deep dive, but also the regulation aspect? It's shaping the industry. I love that way. I'm sorry, now I shut up.
No, that's absolutely fine. Don't worry. I've never had actually an agenda, when I got into the water sector. And I've always been driven by the fact that I wanted to make sure that I contributed to societal objectives. Now it sounds, a bit like, very esoteric and, and I think everybody could say that. But that's true, in fact. And when I decided I would work in the water sector, I would always pick up opportunities in which I could be useful, shape the future, and make sure that there is a win-win situation for everyone. Mm-hmm. So I've never got into, for instance, the public-private debate. I think that's ridiculous because we all work for the same objective. And I had the pleasure and opportunity to work for the UK water industry. So I was in the best position because, as you know, the UK water industry is public and private. So really, for me, the objectives were very much, environmental, economic, and societal. So the sustainability agenda for me was actually a very good framework to work within. And when I say economic, for me, it's not, the environment against economic or society against the environment. For me, it's everything. So I was never afraid of saying that if you make money in the water industry, then it's good. And I was never afraid that you can actually reconcile the fact that you can make money because this money can be injected into investment, and you can make money while providing water, safe water to people. You can improve well-being, you can improve health, and at the same time, you can also improve the environment. So there's no contradiction between the three strands. There's no contradiction between public and private. For me, we're all working towards the same objective. And that's, I know I'm not doing my CV here, which I think would be boring, but it's just to say that alongside these 25 years, for me, it was very much what has driven the things that it was very meaningful to me, and that's what's driven my career up to now.
Well, that gives us a smooth transition into our deep dive, because actually one of the thrusts of sustainable development is this economical aspect. And in your latest venture, so the European Water Tech Accelerator, you are aiming at bringing that element of finance and probably, let's use the big word, venture capital inside the water industry. And I'd like to start, for the muggles like me, which don't know that magical word of finance. So let's start by just defining what is the European Water Tech Accelerator.
Well, the European Water Tech Accelerator was actually set up last year. And with my co-founder, Jacob Tompkins, we decided to set it up because we could see a gap in Europe, despite the fact that you have very good organizations, excellent organizations wanting, to move the water agenda forward. What we've seen as a gap is you have a lot of startups, but these startups can't scale up. I mean, you haven't seen yet, unless you are able to name one company which has been able to scale up and get to the Google same, arena. We don't see any. So we've seen a gap in this, and that's why with Jacob, we have decided to set up the European Water Tech Accelerator for this particular reason. We want to accelerate just a few companies, so not 150 companies, rather, 15 companies, which will become European water champions.
So that's the mission. And how do you intend to achieve that?
That's a good question.
That's a broad question.
That's a very broad question. I think, one thing that we have noticed in the water sector is that we have very good engineers. We have very good tech. What we are missing is entrepreneurs, and I'm not going to be very popular when I say that, and the finance side of things. It's starting, but it's not there yet. And what we have noticed, since you are mentioning finance, is that venture capitalists are still sort of reluctant to invest in the water sector. Funny enough, I'm talking about this in 2 days' time. I'm doing a talk also to talk about, investment in digital water. And I was looking at the portfolio of a very well-known investment fund in the water sector in Europe. They were set up in 2006, and they've done only 7 investments in 14 years, 15 years, yes? So that gives you the gap that we have to close between the startups and the venture capitalists, or I would say, the financial world.
I think there's a lot to uncover in what you just said. First, I fully agree with you with that aspect of entrepreneurship. I think that's the drawback of having an industry which is full of engineers. We probably are very prone to the technical side, but if you have engineers everywhere in every role, they have to have their limits as well. And I guess there's a broad limit on the entrepreneurship side and, of course, the finance side of things. And what you're saying with the investment fund brings me back to a discussion I was having on that same microphone with Nicolas Leigh-Ravelo. And he was mentioning that the water sector is a very good investment for the sturdy long-term investment with low risk. And I guess that on the other end of that spectrum, if you're into venture capital, that means that you are looking at something probably more risky, but also which can bring much more potential. Is that a reason why venture capital wasn't that much involved in water, or do you see other barriers to their involvement?
This is certainly true that there's this issue about the return on investment that venture capitalists are usually looking for. So that has been a reason indeed. But there's also, I think it's not just the return on investment, there is also the issue of the market uptake. Mm-hmm. Despite the fact that you've seen, every single, and probably today we're going to see that being the World Water Day, that water, is a global issue. Water is life. Water is, like the most important thing, and the major risks according to the World Water Forum, or, where is the finance? Where is the market?
So basically you're saying they're not walking the talk.
No, and despite the fact that we keep saying that water, and I'm sure you've been to all these conferences, like where we congratulate ourselves by saying, like that water will be the next thing. I've said also that water would be the next investment, area. I think, there's if the market is not ready yet for these innovations that are coming onto the market, then we have a problem. I think, for a successful innovation investment strategy, you need 3 things. You need entrepreneurs, you need scalability, which is market, and you need the tech. And for me, these are the 3 things which will make the water sector successful in the future, including not just, like the big players who are very successful. And in fact, if you look at, I'm diverging a bit now, but if you look at the return rate for big water companies, they are pretty good. So now what we need to work on is how innovation is going to be attractive enough for these investment funds, generally speaking, not just for VCs, but generally speaking. So they need to trust the fact that entrepreneurs will be able to sell their tech or their product to the market, and that the market is confident in the product as well.
Is that where you step in as a startup accelerator?
Yes.
How?
Yes. No, I think we need to work. I mean, obviously our core activity is to accelerate companies. So practically speaking, what we do is we are very selective. So having worked in an investment fund and working with investment funds, we are very selective. So that's why we're not going to accelerate many companies. And we do a due diligence, and we have many conversations with the CEOs, with the team. We look at the tech, and we look at the potential for scalability. Once we've done that, we work with the team on a program which is tailor-made. So it's not one size fits all. And we look at what areas we need to work on. So it can be finance, how to prepare a pitch for investors. It can be how to pitch to the market. It can be the market positioning, because sometimes many startups don't know where they stand, to this positioning against their competitors. It can be, looking at how to structure the team. It can be, what kind of partnerships would be most useful to scale up quickly. Because the core of our activity is not just scaling up, it's to scale up quickly. And back to your question about, the very long time, that's precisely what we want to work on. It's how you can reduce the time where the investor is actually going to see that it is profitable, not just, generating revenues, but also being profitable, and then they can plan an exit in the time that usually is part of their strategy, investment strategy. Yeah.
What you describe here sounds to me like those companies would be having probably a golden idea, but they would be at a stage which is previous to the product market fit. They don't necessarily have that product market fit yet, which means the market traction isn't really there already, and you would be supporting them to get that market traction. So we are really speaking of early stage companies. Do I translate that right?
You're absolutely right. We are also considering this type of companies. We are also considering companies which are already generating revenues, so which have already market traction and wants to scale up. They want to scale up, but they don't know how to do it. So they have a proven product, if you like. They have already clients, but now they need to go to the next step. So they would need money. They would need a strategy, and they would probably need to look at the team. And believe me or not, but this type of companies are not really there yet. I mean, we can't find many like this. So you have early stage, you have late stage, but the ones in the middle, which I think, and that's a personal view, are the best, let's say, the best future. These are much more difficult to find.
There's, again, so much things I'd like to uncover in what you just said. But regarding this, let's say, early stage scale up or late stage startup, depending on how we want to call them, is it something which you would call as very European to have those companies which are missing, or is it something which you see worldwide? The reason why I'm asking that is that on that same microphone, I was discussing with the Elemental Accelerator, well, not the accelerator, but with Kimberly Baker. And I had this impression that from a North American perspective, there's maybe a better network, or it's maybe more advanced, or let's again use the big name, they might be in advance compared to what we do here. And it sounds to me like there's a full ecosystem topic, because if you have many accelerators, many investment funds dedicating to this, well, probably you also have the companies which go together. And if we are missing various links in the chain in Europe, that probably you don't have the companies. So probably that's what you aim to solve now with your venture. But how do you see this dichotomy between old school Europe and North America, or maybe Asia?
Yeah, no, you're right. Certainly, we can't say that Europe is leading despite all the money injected. I mean, there's one thing we can't dispute, and I'm going to answer your question. But there's one thing we can't dispute is the fact that there's a lot of public funding injected into water. And obviously, one area which is very close to my heart is the European funding. And you have a lot of money injected into new ideas, projects, and tech. I think the difference is between Europe and the US, and I will go back to Asia. between Europe and the US is the money injected. When a startup in Europe is looking for 1 million, they are so happy, when they have managed to raise that, usually between 12 and 18 months. In the US, it's a range, between 5, 10, 15 millions. So what you can do, obviously within the 1 million and the 5 million is completely different. So, it's the same industry, although it's not set up the same way, obviously, between Europe and the US. The money injected is not the same. And that's what we are missing in Europe. And that's why we have set up the accelerator as well. And what I keep saying to the startups I work with, whether it's in the accelerator or with my own company, is go for the big numbers straight away, because that will be one way of scaling up. If you want to be the first, you need to be quick. Competition is there, and it's not just competition from Europe. It's a global competition now, including from Asia, from Singapore, from South Korea, from China. So that's one thing. I think you're also absolutely right in saying, we are missing this ecosystem. The funny thing is that you have many organizations working in the water sector. And again, they are doing a good job. The gap we want to close is making sure that we have the right people with the right mindset within one, let's say, organization. And that's what we are trying to do. And what I mean by that is the right mindset is, again, looking forward, looking out of the box, being able, that's my favorite phrase, having entrepreneurs which are able to sell fridges to Eskimos. So we need to move from a very successful water sector, because it has worked. I mean, you were talking about regulation. I think Europe is very much leaning, in this area, and for the best. So I think, we can be really, or we can come back, to be a leader in the water sector, because we have everything to succeed. We have the money, we have the private money, public funding, the startups, we have big companies. We are a big market. But I think what is missing now is the willingness to go to the next step.
There's something, it's just a weird idea, which is regularly popping up in my mind. We are a tech-driven sector, meaning that one major source of innovation usually is someone doing some very, very, very advanced research, nice research in university, in high schools, sometimes in companies, and coming with incredible technology. And then you're looking to a market. What could be a potential application of that crazy technology? And sometimes I'm wondering if the other way around would be possible. Some kind of startup studios. You are out there in the market, you find problems, you have no clue how to solve them, but you just say, hey, here, there's a problem. If there's a problem, there's value to bring. Please, someone find a solution. But the market would be there, and we would be looking for the solution. So we would be leveraging the technical know-how of that industry while just leapfrogging this market element, because we would start with the market. Do you think that's utopic and impossible, or could that be another way to look at it?
Oh no, you're absolutely right. And I think that's a brilliant idea, especially in Europe, because we always start, with research, and we don't look at what the market needs. And that's why, for instance, as the European Water Tech Accelerator, I can tell you that from next month, we're going to start also having half-an-hour conversations with market players, understanding what they need. Because I know, since the beginning of our conversation, I've been blaming the market. But at the same time, the market is sort of flooded with solutions. If I take an example, leakage detection. I mean, we looked at this area as an accelerator, and we could not see the difference between one tech and the other tech. But one company, one startup, has been very clever because they took it from the prop tech. So they've been looking at, the working with property managers, the prop tech area rather than the water tech area. So they looked at what the market needed, and they packaged it in a way that it responded to this need. And as a result of that, they managed to raise funds, and their positioning is very clear. So it's no longer on leakage reduction. It's very much, on managing water in buildings, if I make it short. So you're absolutely right. And that's one issue also within the accelerator that we're looking at. We're looking at what the market needs, what are the niche markets as well. Getting back to the issue, which is, of interest to me, is finance. Would fintech, for instance, be applicable to the water industry? That's one thing we are looking at the moment, within the accelerator. So we don't want to look at what the water sector knows already. We're not arrogant enough, although I'm French. We're not arrogant enough to say, we're going to teach you how to do it. What we want to do is to prepare the startups, whether they are early stage, spin-off early stage, or let's say, not yet late stage, but in the middle, to be ready to speak to the market, to be able to attract investment. And at the same time, we want to open up opportunities for the market to say precisely what you're saying. There's probably something that we don't know yet, but we would like to know, and that will help us in meeting our challenges as well.
It's interesting what you just said about this leakage topic, because it reminds me of this very old marketing analogy saying that you're not selling a drill, you're selling a hole in the wall. And you could be going even further and say you're not selling the hole in the wall, you're selling the nice painting that's now hanged in your living room. So you have to have the end goal in mind, so the job to be done. You touched it with the fintech, and actually that was something which I found interesting as part of your call for entries, is that you aim at various fields inside the water industry, but you also mention there might be good ideas that are outside in another sector and that could be translated into the water industry. And the usual suspect here is generally energy, because everybody keeps saying that the energy market is somehow the water market of the future. That if you look what energy is doing now, you know what water is going to do in 5 years. How do you balance innovation that would come from within the sector and innovation that would come from outside?
Well, you were asking me, about the future. I think, it's a bet. I like risks. I've always taken risk in my professional life. I like to think out of the box. And obviously, what you do usually reflects what you are.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a balance between responding to what the market would want. But if you talk about digital water, if we had this conversation 10 or 15 years ago, I'm not sure that, all this discussion about digital water and applications of digital water would have been, at the core of our conversation. So it's the same, for the upcoming sessions, I would say, and upcoming topics. I think, people can be open, and you need to find early adopters who will be willing to test, new ideas. At the same time, you have to listen to what people want. But sometimes also you need to, not to force them, but to say, look, if we want success, sometimes we need to take risks, balanced risks, but still risks. And if we can demonstrate benefits, then I think it's a win-win situation for the sector, for the startups, and also for the investment fund. And for the energy sector, you're right, I would have a more balanced view. I think, the energy sector is obviously probably ahead of us because they were forced to do it. The deregulation of the sector, introduced competition, the carbon agenda, pushed for obviously new ideas, new tech, new products, new services. So it has been a good driver, which is not the case in water. We're still in the same industry, despite the fact that you've got innovation around, around the sector. And this innovation has difficulties to enter this industry, that's for sure.
You mentioned that we don't have inside this sector a Google or a Uber or a Facebook of water, which is probably linked with what you just said about the fact that it's a regulated, sturdy sector. You cannot just flip it on its head that easy. But if you look at the news recently, the fact that EQT has sold Innovise to Autodesk, and they turned a 250 million company into a billion company, meaning that Innovise enters the world of the unicorns. This magical 1 billion bar is the bar for the unicorns. And it turns out to be a digital water company. Does that mean that the future has to be digital? Or looking at all your tracks, I mean, there are many other topics that could be addressed that might be even absolutely low tech. But how easy is it to tease and to pitch an investor with something which is not digital nowadays, which doesn't mention any kind of the buzzwords like artificial intelligence, machine learning, IoT, and which instead would come with, I don't know, the best trickling filters there was, and there will be?
No, digital water is certainly, I mean, back to what you were saying about the long time, for return on investment. Digital water should be seen as an opportunity because, again, coming back to my point about scalability, usually, digital tools or digital tech are much easier to scale up. So from an investor point of view, the digital area will be attractive because of the return on investment, because the high margin, because of the scalability. But there's still this issue about the market and whether digital water will be taken up by the market. So you have all the green lights, if you like, from the startup point of view. And what is not known yet is whether digital water will be successful on the other side of the coin.
So it's still a kind of chicken and egg here, because it could be that this market is really highly conservative, which everybody's saying, or it could be that we have no clue how to sell and market to that market, which means that they just keep with what they have because they don't trust, or we don't bring sufficient proof of value the risk benefit isn't that favorable to changing something which is working for 20 years.
You're right, but going back to our example on leakage reduction, you have new tech for which, you don't need to dig, a big hole in the road, that would save time, money, resources. But now I am a water company, and if I don't have, a specific department dedicated to do due diligences in leakage reduction, why would I decide for one tech or the other? So it's also, let's say, the provider, and I'm not talking about the large providers, I'm talking about the startups, the area I know most. Also to make sure that they're not selling another leakage reduction technology or product, but they're selling the best one. And back to my phrase, being able to sell fridges to Eskimos. So as you say, it's a chicken and eggs, but I think everybody has to work on practices to make sure that we move forward. So we all agree that digital water is useful, and we've seen it with the COVID-19 situation. So I think there's no question about this, and you can read, hundreds of articles about this. Now it's about the implementation. It's about how you scale up. And actually, I wonder, because I wrote an article for Aquatech recently about this, if there are not too many digital products now. I know it's been very controversial when I said that, but I was deliberately provocative to see the reaction. And there is an issue about this as well, coming back to my example of leakage reduction. So is it about having one or two, standing out of the crowd, if I want to be, again, provocative? Or is it, the fact that there is a very big market and there is room for everyone?
It's kind of a good analogy from the water sector, because when you look at it, the biggest companies in the water sector own maybe 2 or 3% of the market share. It's a highly distributed market. So it sounds pretty logical that when new innovation comes along, I wouldn't expect a winner takes it all. You could see that as well, when DVD was over and that we went to Blu-ray, actually Blu-ray won, but there were like 20 competing technologies and 19 were killed and Blu-ray won. But in the water sector, we don't have a tradition like that. You could debate for hours about what is the best treatment for your water, and still there might be 17 good answers to the question. So yeah, there's always a subjective matter in this industry, which is hard to grasp, of course, but which makes it maybe different from other sectors. I know a bit better that sectors than the others, so it's hard for me to compare, but I would guess that that makes it a bit special.
Yeah, I think there is an issue, actually, you're bringing up a very important issue about demonstrating that the product or service works. I think one of the issues, again, putting my market hat on, one of the issues has been that I think the sector has been open to trial many technologies, and it hasn't been always successful. So to be fair, I can see that they can't always invest in something without knowing what the end result will be. So one area which I think, should be also probably taken up by public funding is de-risking innovation. Today, you can have this within European projects, for instance, which can go up to TRL 7, 8. You can go to lab. For instance, United Utilities in the UK has a lab. Anglian Water has also an innovation window, but they take the risk. And the money which is missing is not so much the investment money. That's the money to de-risk the innovation. I think we have to learn from the past. We have to listen to what the water industry said to us, and we need to de-risk the innovation. We need to make sure that it works. And not just from a tech point of view, which is the other thing that we want to do within the accelerator, is also from a business model point of view. Up to very recently, it was just, I have a tech, wonderful, it works, the pilot is wonderful, I can save, 20%, the favorite number, 20% of energy, that's great. Okay, how are you going to sell your product? And that's when usually you get the big blank. So it's also about training, researchers. Not every researcher will be an entrepreneur, and we're not asking that. But if you want to be an entrepreneur and you want to set up a spin-off, you need to ask yourself all these questions. Usually the tech is very good. When we do due diligences, in 90% of the cases, the tech is very good. But what is missing is the market positioning, the business model, and how you're going to get to the market. And just to give you, I'm not going to name anybody, but I got the examples of 2 startups which came to me, said, oh, look, I have this very good tech. Now can you help me get it to the market? No, that's not the way it works.
Which problem are you solving? So
it's also about training. And again, to be fair, it's a new way, it's a new culture. So you've got, when I started 5 years ago, when I decided to go into this finance world, simply because I identified that there was the missing gap. So I said to myself, let's address it. Nobody was talking about investment. Nobody was talking about investment in innovation. Everybody was talking about investment in infrastructure. 5 years later, now we talk about investment, we talk about finance. So if you explain to people, if you train researchers who want to be spin-off funder or want to be entrepreneurs, then I think it can work. But we are working vertically, we're not working horizontally.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we want to do with the accelerator. So our core activity is very much to work with startups and make sure that they are successful. And it's also to work on the missing gaps.
You mentioned the business models, and that gives me a wonderful opportunity to catch your brain on something which is, I keep asking. So listeners to that podcast might have heard the question before, but I still don't have an answer. So maybe you have it. When I was discussing with Matthew Silver from Cambrian Innovation, he's selling water as a service, which is, I'd say, to our industry, still a pretty young business model. It's not the only one, but basically it's something which is recent. And that would, in my humble understanding and opinion, open a door to hypergrowth strategies. You could decide that you raise a huge investment, you place your container everywhere in this world, and you start then selling a service, but much faster than you would if you grew organically, putting one container, and once that one is paid back, you put the second container. On the paper, I don't see the pitfall. I don't see what's not working. Yet I'm probably most than probably, again, I don't have to be too arrogant. I'm French too. I don't think I'm the best brain in this industry. So if I can come up with such an idea, thousands of people have had that same idea before. What is it that I'm not seeing here, which makes hypergrowth difficult in the water industry? Do you think it's possible to achieve hypergrowth? And is it desirable?
First of all, I would like to congratulate Matthew. I think what he's done is great. And I think we should have more of this kind of examples in the water sector. Again, the difference between the US and Europe is precisely risk. So if we had this type of money in Europe, and I'm not saying about the amount of money because we have it also in Europe, but it's also this innovation in the business model, which is not really innovative when you think about it, but would be for the water sector. I think that would change considerably the way that we look at innovation as well in Europe. So I don't think it's crazy. I think we should do it as well. I've been looking at different business models. Is the traditional VC model that we all know the right one for the water sector? That's a question. I don't have necessarily the answer today. But I think, if European startups were able to sell a service and not a tech, and especially with digital water, that would change considerably the way of the success in the water sector. And I like your ambition about hypergrowth, but if we had just growth to start with, I think, I would be a very happy woman. That's really important. I think we have, very good startups in Europe. Now we need the ingredients, and one ingredient could be what Matthew has done, for instance, definitely, for making sure that, they self-finance also their own growth.
What's the role there of the existing layer of water companies? Because in Europe, we also have the biggest companies worldwide. I mean, there's, of course, the two obvious like Suez and Veolia. But if you look at the sensor market, for instance, all the big names are European, be it Hack and Resauser. I mean, and of course, if there's an existing base of big players, they might be reluctant to take the risk of being disrupted. And I was still with Suez when Suez bought GE Water, and at the time, GE Water was like the black duck within the GE world. They were the ones making the less money, and when they got acquired by Suez, they became the rock stars of Suez because they were the ones making the most money and the biggest growth. So those giants come with their inertia, and do they influence somehow the market there in a positive or in a negative way, by the way?
Most likely. On the positive side, I would say that what you hear today is that, or what I heard, especially from the water tech, not necessarily from the water providers, but from the water tech providers, is that they see sort of these startups as a proxy to R&D. So in other words, if they want to remain competitive, they need to be quick in terms of bringing, new stuff on the market. And in that respect, they are looking at, what the innovation landscape looks like. At the same time, if we talk about Suez and Veolia and these big water providers, not just them, but I mean, let's say, the water providers, we were talking about regulation. One issue, which I think, I would say two problems or two challenges. Don't call it problems, challenges. One challenge is culture. We were talking about these engineers, having worked in the water sector for some time. And let's be realistic. Thinking out of the box is difficult sometimes. And we can understand that, you don't make a revolution, within a few years. So that's something which should not be underestimated. In this whole debate, you have men and women, and that's sometimes also something we forget. The other issue is that these companies have as clients municipalities. And as you know, since you worked for one of them, they have to go through tenders. One of the criteria is price. So if we don't change this, if we don't change the fact that innovation would become a clear criterion for these tenders, and that innovation is seen as a driver to improve water management in municipalities. And when I say municipalities, again, coming back to my environment, society, and economic, then it will be very difficult for these companies to innovate and to say we are a driver. So again, we need to look at every single piece of the jigsaw to make sure that everything works at the same time. And that's probably why also now they are turning to the industry and they go outside Europe for their growth. Yeah.
You mentioned the men and the woman, which is also something which was intriguing to me when I was reading your call for entries, because when you aim, you mentioned that you're looking at those hidden nuggets, these companies which are between early stage and late stage, those ones which have the biggest growth potential. And what you mentioned straight away is that you are also helping them to align then for an exit. Is that the only horizon as a company, or do you think it's possible within this industry to build the next big thing?
Exit actually can have several meanings. One is the one you describe, that they are eaten up, by a bigger company for the best. And I don't have anything against this, because that brings also along, the innovation in these big companies. Yeah. And as I was saying to you, these big companies see now these startups as a proxy to R&D. So I think this acquisitions trend, will continue in the water sector, and that's fine. Exit can also mean that the investment fund, which has invested at the beginning, can exit. And the startup then become an SME, a mid-cap, and a large company. And you're right, we don't have many of these. That's something I would like to see. And I think there are many ways of doing this. I was saying, that digital water now is flooded with platforms. We could have acquisitions, we could have exits, and we could have consolidation. We could have consolidation of startups. It's not just, like that's the fault of one part of the sector. I think what we want to do with the accelerator is to list, the challenges, to learn from the past, to learn from the present. And we're not stupid in Europe. We have very good people, very good startup, money, tech. So we can do it as well.
There's probably an element of skill set, but above all of mindset. I've alluded to a couple of times on that microphone, but when I was in engineering school, it never crossed my mind to found a company. For me, it was just obvious. There's these big players. One day I'm going to be working for one of these big players, and that's my career. And the next 40 years will be happily doing that. And again, chicken and egg. Is it because we have the big groups that we want to work in the big groups? Is it because we don't have that much of the entrepreneurship mindset, or it's not as populated within that sector than maybe in others? But let's say if I was to go back in time, 10 years before and give an advice to myself, I would have some things to whisper to my ear and to say, hey, keep an eye open, keep an ear open. Unfortunately, time travel isn't that popular yet. So I was wondering if you, maybe as a better knower of that field than I would ever be, have some advice that you would give to the wannabe entrepreneur in the water industry, or to the people that didn't even realize that that's a possible track, which is a potential win-win track for the sector and for them. What would be your advice?
Well, I would have a couple. First of all, I would say believe in yourself. I know it sounds crazy, but believe in yourself and believe in what you do and take risk. And that's the difference between, and I'm going to answer your question, but I think that's very important. If you fail in the US, doesn't matter, you start again. If you fail in Europe,
you're a failure.
You said it, I didn't. So you talk about mindset. It's not so much, I know when we talk about water, we talk about, solving the global challenges. That's right. But the first thing I would say, be prepared to take the risk, believe in yourself, and convince people that what you've got and what you've done is the best. And I would strongly recommend, to work on these 3 key skills. We have to change our mindset as well as Europeans. And I don't think, we should be apologizing for what we are, for what we have, because, you're French, I'm French. And the École Française de l'Eau has been a reality. And it has been exported, globally. And I think we need to make sure that people have this ambition back, If we talk about the water sector, unless you have a very disruptive technology or service, then I would say, before digging into an idea, look at what's around you. And not just the market, but also, the tech landscape. Does it exist? Am I changing, something? Would the market be ready to buy it? Because this angle is sometimes missed. And if you can tick all these boxes, then you will get the finance.
You mentioned the finance, and that is going to be, because I have at some point to be cautious of your time, because I could spend another hour on that topic easily. You mentioned the finance. I'd be interested to have your personal vision there on the way finance looks at you. Is it like, you're crazy, what are you doing with that sector? There's so much more interesting to do, I don't know, with IT, with sending rocket to Mars. Why the water sector? Or is it seen as impact investing? Or what's the vision of the general world of finance towards the water VC and the water investment company or accelerators? Or
Well, the feedback we've had so far is very positive. So they see us as a good news. Reason being that we are able to do this due diligence. Because we operate as an investment fund, investors can see us, and we're not the only one, but they can see us as bringing to them a curated deal flow. They see that also as a hope for the future, because they can see that we are great believers in what's coming in terms of innovations, and that we are addressing issues that they can't address, so all the discussion we've just had. So it's not like a factory, it's addressing, the key issues that hopefully will make the startups more investable in the future.
Does that mean you do impact investing or you do investing?
Whether it's impact or impact investing or investing, it's all the same. Even impact investment funds now are looking for return on investment.
Okay, so there's both are coming to a common end.
Yes, it's exactly the same. So
sounds like a good news.
And again, making money is not a big world. It's good.
Yeah, that's the point where I have to stop myself, because if we go into that, making money is bad, and I can spend another hour, because it is a big limit you have in your brain, and I could tell you so much stories from back in my engineering school, where even if you're going to the private sector, you're not going. I mean, water is a common good. How can you go to the private sector? And you alluded a bit to it in your introduction, but as I said, I have to be careful not to spend another hour. If it's fine with you, Gaetane, I propose you to switch to the rapid fire questions.
Mm-hmm.
It's time for the rapid fire questions.
So my first one would be, what is the most exciting project you've been working on and why?
probably the accelerator, but I have always been starting up new ventures in my life. So it's always been exciting, but the accelerator is particularly exciting.
Sounds like a life lesson. What's your favorite part of your current job?
Being at the age that I am at, and I won't tell you, how old I am, it's probably now helping funders of startup.
What is the trends to watch out for in the water industry? And here we have to be cautious because if you give too much of a hint, people will only apply for that in your call for entries.
I'm not going to give on purpose any trend. I would say, thinking out of the box.
That's, I guess, a very, very powerful advice. What is the thing you care about the most when you're working on a new project? And what is the one you care the least?
What I care the most is the impact that will make and the results that will bring. And the least is probably the time that I'm going to spend on it.
The usual answer I hear a lot about this least is often, we don't care about how much money we spend when we are innovating because we have to spend as much as necessary to come up with the right thing. And I take the opportunity having someone working on the finance end, that sounds like perfect on paper, but investment people would just hate you for that. You don't have to burn money. You have to still use it for a purpose.
I'm very cautious about this kind of statement that spending money. I think you have to spend money for the right objective. So you can probably, when you talk about basic research, you can spend as much money as possible because otherwise, we wouldn't be where we are now in terms of scientific and technological progress. Let's be fair. But I think for the next steps, and if Jacob was with us, he would tell you that I'm the one doing the finance. No, I think you have to direct your finance to the right objective. So for me, it's not just about spending money.
Do you have sources to recommend to keep up with the water and wastewater market trends?
The accelerator, of course. We have a LinkedIn. We don't have any website because we don't want to be spending money on website yet. But we have a LinkedIn profile, the European Water Tech Accelerator, and we post, I think, good posts. And we will be having spring conversations and summer conversation in the near future, as I was saying. So that's a very good source of finding trends out of the box.
Perfect. And if you're listening to that right now, the link to the Water Tech Accelerator is, of course, in the description of that episode.
Thank you.
Last question. Would you have someone to recommend me to have on that same microphone?
Well, somebody really different from me, but I've known for ages, probably my co-founder, Jacob Tompkins.
Okay.
Very
Why?
different. Because we disagree on many things, but that's why we've been working together for the last 20 years or something. We are very complementary. He thinks also out of the box. And he says what he thinks, despite the fact that he's very British. and I think he's very unusual also in the water sector.
Perfect. Then I'm sold.
Thank you, Antoine.
Gaetane, it's been a pleasure. And I wish you the best of luck and to your companies the best of luck in your call for entries. And I'm really looking forward to see where that is heading.
Thank you, Antoine. I wish you also the best of luck, for your podcast and for your career and your new ventures as well.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Don't Waste Water. This podcast was brought to you by GF Piping Systems. Loved this episode? Head over to Apple Podcasts to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. See you next time.